Yes.
All right.
Look at each other right here.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Munson Steed, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. This is where we find out where all the power is coming from. This is where we get insights on power, and we give you access to executives, access to community leaders, access to change agents who are making a difference in our community, giving us information on how we can empower ourselves, change our culture in a positive way, and get some insights on what we might not know and share this data with us so that you and I can move forward with our seat at the table. Today, we are joined by a phenomenal executive at Neilson. She is truly a representative of our community. She has been in the halls of power. She has definitely represented the community in a way that shares insight. She is also a caretaker of the images of our community as it relates to data and bytes and information so that we can really know. If you haven't been in her presence, you should. If you've listened or heard her speak, whether it's across the country, there's not an executive group in our community that she has not stood in front of, sponsored, and suggested to us to take control of our power and understand it. I'm speaking of none other than Miss Cheryl Grace. How are you?
Hi, Munson. I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, it's a beautiful time here at the seat at the table because we've got executives like you who can tell us the truth, give us insight on where we are as a community, where we are as a country, which is a real challenge for us to understand the data and to understand how this country is changing and moving. And there's obviously a movement. You've got a 10-year report. So we really want to know and get some insight on where it is and where executives like yourselves find yourself in the midst of this data and exchange that is happening to empower our community and to understand what this data says about us.
Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having Neilson on. It is indeed the release of the 10th annual report on the state of the African American community, the African American consumer. We're calling this year's report the Black community, from the power of the Black community, from moment to movement. And there's a lot that's happened in the last 10 years. There's a lot that's happened in the last 9 months. And what we do is we take a really comprehensive look at where things were back in 2011 when we did the very first report and where things stand now. And the number one thing that I think is important is the fact that the Black consumer population's buying power has increased by 48% since we did the first report. And right now, today, it's standing at $1.4 trillion. That's nothing to sneeze at.
Right. When you say that, most people have no idea because we don't get $1 trillion in our bank accounts often. And so understanding harnessing that power. The other thing is, and I think the report, what does it mean that consumer companies are actually spending against that number? How do we see them spending against that number? And how important is it? Can you kind of give us some insight on what we know about that?
Yeah, so what we know is where we're spending our time and where we're spending our money. And that's what the reports have historically broken out over the course of the last 10 years. And we know that we've been reporting since day one that the Black community is a voracious, they consume voracious amounts of content. The content over the years has changed. And so we were just doing some banter before you and I started this, and someone talked about Gilligan's Island and how, we grew up watching that as kids. And well, now, while Gilligan's Island was what we watched because we didn't have a choice, what we have found over the course of the last 10 years, is that African Americans have more choices in what they're watching on television. A lot of that has happened during the last 10 years. And, some of it is from the Shonda Rhimes school of, if you produce it, They will come. And as a result of that, we've seen a lot of shows emerge on broadcast networks. We've seen a lot of shows emerge on cable networks. And now we're seeing a lot of shows emerge on the other platforms, the streaming devices that weren't inclusive or as diverse 10 years ago. And so now you have shows from Empire to shows on, and I'm trying to read some of these. So shows from Empire to the cable shows like American Dad, that Blacks see that they have an opportunity to watch diverse characters across the globe. And it's really very important to understand that that content diversity is as important as the fact that Blacks are watching so much content.
And just thinking about that content, it creates a new dynamic in the marketplace. So obviously characters will be speaking in a different way. We will see different leading people, and it will create dialogue amongst our community. In seeing that, what do you think this is saying to the next generation of African Americans about what their expectations should be about television, media, and the movement?
What it really sends is a message that, again, I kind of mentioned it when I talked about the Shonda Rhimes phenomenon. If you produce it, they will come. If we have content that speaks to us in our multidimensionality, we will watch it. And it's important for us to put our time and our effort and our money where our mouths are. And so for younger generations coming up, the reason that you have so much diversity in content right now across all of these video platforms, as fragmented as they are, you have these choices because we have had people out there working really, really hard to develop content that is worthy of who you are as an African American and how you show up in the world. And we should be showing up in positive roles and not just, being shown in some of the negative stereotypical roles that years before, we had no choice but to play. So this says to me that you as a young person understand your power and that every decision that you make, from what you watch on television to what you buy in a grocery store, has impact from a collective perspective.
Yeah, I like that. But there is also the new challenge of the Ava DuVernays, the advent of Netflix as an option. So you've got a platform that clearly has identified that they are focused, or they are funding, they are going to respect from their executive. When you see a CEO like Reed Hastings actually make a donation of $140 million as a CEO, pick a African-American CMO, and she's a female, and then commit to actually making content that speaks to our community. So when you think of Ava, you think of Chandra, and you think of the 13th Amendment, that is content that is very cause-based. How and what should this say to all leadership about how we think of ourselves as it relates to content and media?
So content and media and choices. And we launched yesterday the new brand for the consumer division of Neilson called Neilson IQ. And as part of that launch, we had a conference that included Magic Johnson as the keynote spokesperson. And Magic talked about valuing diversity when it comes to